We are now hours away from the British referendum. Tomorrow, citizens will head to the polls. They will choose whether Britain should remain in the European Union. My next guest says the vote on the EU might put the country at risk moving forward. Brian Kloss is a fellow in comparative politics at the London School of Economics, and he joins me now from our London bureau. So, Brian, the latest polls put both sides neck and neck. Why do you think it is that the referendum at least appears to be this close?
Yeah, I think this is a vote that's about how much the price of sovereignty costs for British voters. And I think the question is quite clearly one about economics and identity. So the people who are voting for Brexit to leave the European Union tend to put a premium on British sovereignty, the idea that Britain doesn't need to consult Brussels anymore and it can go it alone. And on the other side, I think there's a overwhelmingly clear evidence that a vote to leave the European Union would put British markets, the British economy at risk. And even the Leave campaigners acknowledge that this is a serious potential risk. But there's a divide, and people are deciding which one they value more.
You know, in this country, people remember the Quebec referendum, and it was always thought of as, an appeal to the heads versus the hearts. Do you think that that's at work in Britain?
Yeah, I think certainly, and I think that a lot of the heartstrings that are being pulled by the Leave campaign are heartstrings of fear. I think there's a lot of rhetoric about migration that's overblown, in my opinion, and a lot of fear-mongering about the idea that migrants are going to overrun Britain and change the content and the cultural identity of the island. I think that's a bit overstated, and I think some of the rhetoric has gotten at times out of hand.
Can you tell us a little bit more? You brought up some of them, but some of the key concerns that the British Prime Minister and others have made about Britain choosing to leave.
Sure. I mean, there's a lot of advantages of being in the European Union, including access to the single market, so that there are no tariffs or barriers to trade between Britain and the European Union. The free movement of people obviously helps the economy. London is a global financial center, and it's a lot easier for banks in Canary Wharf to hire people coming out of Berlin if they don't have to wait for visa processing fees or pay for visa processing in general. And I think there's a lot about globalization and economic competitiveness that leaving the EU would certainly hurt. A lot of the estimates suggest that this would have a knock-on effect on Britain's economy, not only in the short term, but potentially for decades to come, and make the economy less competitive in a global marketplace.
What about the Leave people, the Leave proponents that have said, we are giving up some sovereignty, that there are unelected bureaucrats in Brussels that are dictating a lot of our laws and our policies in Britain?
Sure, and this is where I said this is the question about the price of sovereignty. I mean, on the one hand, I would say that the idea of this being an undemocratic system holds water, but it's also overstated. There are direct elections for MEPs, for example, and the British people tend not to participate in them. The last vote in 2014, the turnout was only a meager 35%, and turnout tomorrow is expected to be about double that. So if people had more of a voice in and chose to vote at the same rate in the MEP, the members of European Parliament elections, as they do in Brexit, they would maybe feel more like there was responsiveness. I also think that there are people who believe that this sovereignty is worth taking a few points hit on GDP growth. And that's something that both campaigns are talking about, and it's where the fear-mongering comes in from the Leave side about this aspect of migrants coming in and taking jobs or taking benefits, which again, I think the rhetoric is a little bit hyperbolic.
Now, many have said that this referendum has highlighted the fault lines in Britain, right? There really is, there are divisions.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, it's a huge, huge fault line, and sometimes families are being divided by this, especially because there's a huge generational divide. People who are 65 or older are overwhelmingly in favor of leaving the European Union, while young people are overwhelmingly in favor of staying part of it. And this is a decision that will affect them for generations to come, and for them for their entire lives, decades to come down the road. So there's also a huge class divide. People who are poorer tend to be more in favor of Brexit than people who are richer. And I think that some of this comes to this notion that I think is overplayed, that migrants are coming in. It's sort of the idea of Schrodinger's migrant, the idea that some person could come in from, say, Romania or Poland and simultaneously lays around on benefits on the dime of the British taxpayer, at the same time that they're actively stealing jobs. And it doesn't cut both ways.
So looking ahead to tomorrow, what do you predict the result will be?
It's very difficult to tell. The latest polls show a neck-and-neck race. if I had to guess, I would say a narrow victory for the Remain campaign, but the only reason that I would suggest that is because in the Scottish referendum, when there was a vote for the unknown or the status quo, the unknown being independence, the late-breaking voters tended to overwhelmingly support the status quo. And the question is, what are that 7 or 8% who haven't decided yet going to do tomorrow? And the conventional wisdom would be that they'll stick for the status quo rather than taking an economic risk.
It really is reminiscent for a lot of Canadians of 1995 here in this country.
Yeah, sure. And, it's something where the comparison is apt because Britain is about 1/6 of Europe's economy, which is the same size as Quebec in relation to Canada's economy. So tomorrow's vote will be something for Europe like lopping off Alberta or Quebec from Canada's economy. It will have massive implications. It's a historic vote.
Mm-hmm. Brian, good to speak with you today. Thank you very much.
Thanks so much for having me on the program. It was a pleasure.
Brian Klaas is a fellow in comparative politics at the London School of Economics. He joined me from London.